Hundreds of thousands of taxpayers are facing extended wait times to receive their tax refunds from the IRS. In the past, many of them would normally receive a paper check from the agency, but the Trump administration is phasing those out in favor of electronic payments that are faster and less prone to errors. In some cases, though, taxpayers are now waiting months for their refunds. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman joins me with more. Jory, thanks for being here.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
What is your reporting telling you about just how many taxpayers are in this predicament and why?
Well, according to Democrats on the House Ways and Means Committee, they're saying that 830,000 taxpayers are in this situation. About 530,000 of these notices went out last week, and that this week another 300,000 taxpayers received these notices. Basically, what happened is that these are taxpayers that filed their tax returns, did everything they were supposed to, but they did not give the IRS direct deposit information, bank account information, that they would get their refunds electronically. And so the IRS has no means of sending that return the way that they would prefer, which is electronically, digitally, rather than cutting a paper check. And that's because last year, President Donald Trump signed an executive order directing agencies like the Treasury Department to wean off of paper checks and to move as many of their payments electronically as possible. There's some motivations behind that. These are payments that are generally easier to track. They are faster to send. They're overall more efficient. What we heard from the IRS is that paper checks are 16 times more likely to be lost or otherwise not sent to the recipient that's intended here. And so that's the general thrust of what the administration is looking at. But these are taxpayers who are waiting longer than they otherwise would have to get these returns. How long are they having to wait? Upwards of about 2 months in some cases. This is a much longer wait than most taxpayers. And in the cases of taxpayers who do send their direct deposit information, they can expect to get their refunds within about 9 days. And so I spoke to Anisha Stephen. They're a former senior advisor at the Treasury Department. They now work at the Roosevelt Institute. And Stephen said that this is a really tough situation for people who are perhaps unbanked or in any number of situations because taxpayers who may want to give the IRS their banking information, if they have it, they can only resolve that online. They have to set up an online account and give the information to the IRS that way. There's no option to do this over the phone or in person. And here's what Stephen had to say about that.
We often in this country talk about people living paycheck to paycheck, but the reality is that people often also live refund to refund. Getting a refund, especially if you are a low-income person, if you rely on things like the Earned Income Tax Credit or the Child Tax Credit, these are infusions once a year from the government that help pay down credit card bills, that help with future forecasting for households. Having a delay by 10 weeks or more for close to 1 million people is unacceptable.
Jory, how did the IRS help prepare taxpayers for this transition?
So the IRS did send out a press release and a public announcement last fall in September saying that this change was about to happen, that it was imminent, and that in the upcoming filing season, paper checks were no longer going to be an option for the vast majority of folks. The executive order that this all falls under does grant some limited exceptions. Those haven't been clearly defined yet, but there are some carve-outs for people who absolutely have no other means of getting that refund. But there was some pushback to the IRS's readiness to make this rollout and to announce it to the public. It is a pretty sizable change. The Center for Taxpayer Rights is led by former taxpayer advocate Nina Olson, and that center recommended to the IRS that they actually delay this transition by about a year to give taxpayers more heads up, more time to prepare for a pretty seismic change, and that when you combine that with the sizable staffing cuts at the IRS, that there just weren't enough, there wasn't enough manpower to effectively communicate what was changing and how taxpayers should prepare for it.
Folks who are unbanked probably have other challenges with being reached by that information from the IRS. So what are Treasury and IRS saying about the situation?
So in a press release this week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is still the acting IRS commissioner, he said that more than 63 million tax returns have been processed so far this filing season. That's about nearly half of the total returns it expects to receive. And Bessent said that things are working smoothly, that the IRS and the Treasury Department are working to make sure that these are refunds that are paid out efficiently and on time. We also recently heard from the IRS Chief Executive Officer, Frank Bisignano. He told the House Ways and Means Committee last week that the filing season has gone smoothly. We're about roughly 40% through the filing season. It, of course, ends in mid-April. And when he got specific questions about people in the situation, people who have not sent direct deposit information, he did say that he would go back and look at what's going on there.
Well, Treasury and the IRS work really closely with the tax preparation industry and the tax professionals. What does the industry have to offer in terms of advice for this situation?
Yeah, so tax professionals that I spoke to for this story said that there were certainly steps that the IRS and Treasury could have done to mitigate the impact and mitigate the wait times for people. I did mention about the staffing cuts at the IRS. One downstream effect of that is that there have been fewer in-person taxpayer assistance centers open for people to, free of charge, speak to an IRS employee and say, I need help with any number of issues with the agency. That's something that the Government Accountability Office looked into and the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration looked into. And at a snapshot in January, they said that about 10% of those centers were closed for staffing reasons. And one other thing that was mentioned by the Center for Taxpayer Rights, again, led by the former National Taxpayer Advocate, they brought up the fact that the IRS could have done prepaid debit cards. That's something that the Social Security Administration does, and that's something that the IRS and Treasury had done at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you recall the economic stimulus payments, the payments that in some cases were put on prepaid debit cards for people in these situations where the Treasury Department didn't have banking information for them. That just wasn't set up, even though, by all accounts, it's something they could have done, since seen as they've done it in the past.
There's just a few weeks left in filing season. Do you have any sense that any of these changes will be made this year?
Since we are at the 11th hour of the filing season here, unlikely that these changes would be made now. But one thing that's been talked about in putting together this story is that people hope that this is the last filing season, that this is a problem, that, by the time we're in the situation a year from now, that the IRS and Treasury will have worked out the bugs, that for people in these particular situations, they do have a workaround for them. It's worth pointing out that these taxpayers who don't have direct deposit information, they make up about 7% of overall refunds. That for the vast majority of folks, they do already give this information to the IRS and things run more or less smoothly. But this is a small fraction of the overall population where they are encountering some significant impacts.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for the story.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find all the details at federalnewsnetwork.com.